17th.
Washington Journal continues.
David Makovsky, what is the Israel border fence?
The fence is something that's going up now. About a third of it has been completed. It is being built as a result of 3.5 years of pretty relentless suicide bombing infiltrations from the West Bank into Gaza, into Israel. It has about 280 attempts. 60 of them have killed innocent civilians. Another 95, the bombers have just been killed themselves in a technical glitch, and about another 130 almost have been stopped. And so this is a fence, I think, that really Hamas built.
Who's actually building it, though? The Israeli government?
It's the Israeli government.
Right. And when was it started?
It began in 2002, and it's like a third done.
And how many miles will it be?
It'll be at the end probably somewhere between 450 and 480 miles long.
At a cost of?
Well, the cost unclear. Some say it's $1 million a mile. They vary in certain parts. Of the 450, 480 miles, almost all of it is a fence, although there are small parts, about 3.6 miles in the West Bank, another in the area of Jerusalem, about maybe 12 miles, so maybe 15 out of the 450, 480 that would actually be a wall, and that's areas where there's been sniper fire onto Israeli highways.
Do you think this is a necessity for Israel to have this fence?
I think it's not ideal. I mean, clearly if there was a sense of partnership, that would be much better. But if there isn't a partnership, it's been shattered. I mean, if there would be, no terror, no fence. But given the alternatives, which is perpetual warfare, I think it seems to me that the fence is the best of the options available, because it's not only just a fence, in my view, for Israeli self-defense, it's also a way to disentangle intertwined hostile populations in the West Bank. So it's the only way to kind of square what seems to be an impossible circle, which is everyone wants partition, but no one sees the partnership that can make partition possible. And I think defense is the only way to square the circle. It's clear that if a partnership is resumed in a post-Arafat era, this fence will be much more permeable. Like I said, and if there's totally no terrorism, then there'll be no fence.
Here's a map of Israel.
Right.
Could you kind of give us a rough outline of where this fence is?
All right. The parts that have gone up now have gone up like right around here. It's a western buffer fence over here. Now, it does jut out a little bit over here and here, but it will, for the most part, go along what's known as the 1967 boundaries. And in my view, it's a buffer. Like I said, A, to halt the infiltration of suicide bombers, and B, to disentangle the population. According to the United Nations, which has been hostile to Israel in the past, even they say it's about 14.5% of the West Bank, but it's all along the West. The PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, says Sharon has some secret plan to build it on the east and in effect to encircle the Palestinians. I would say if that indeed happens, instead of this fence kind of facilitating a two-state solution, it could preclude it. But right now, this is not the fence that the Israeli military is building at all. They're building the buffer fence. And you have a situation that 94 to 99% of the Palestinians live east of the fence, which is 85% of the West Bank. And the Jewish settlers, about 170,000 of them, or 76% of the total West Bank Jewish population, lives west of the fence, in the 14.5% of the area near the 67 boundaries. So this fence really, in my view, is a way to facilitate a two-state solution at a time that a partnership has collapsed. So I think it has really a dual purpose, which is fight terror and disentangle these hostile people.
And before we go to calls, this headline in the Washington Times,
Sure.
It's in a lot of papers, 8 bomb victims help fuel protest at The Hague.
Right.
What's happening at The Hague today?
The Hague, the International Court of Justice, the Palestinians have appealed to them to rule that this fence is against international law. Now, what's a very curious thing has happened. The Palestinians were convinced that there would, dozens and dozens of countries would show up with them, but all these countries have, all the European countries, and of course the United States, have not joined because they also believe, even for merely procedural reasons, that if the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, gets involved in issues like this, they will intervene in many of their issues too. So there have been some third world countries that have joined them, but the expectations are much lower. And of course there's a spectacle there on all sides. You've got protests on both sides. The Israelis have brought a bombed out bus from Israel from a couple weeks ago. Now there was just this attack yesterday from Bethlehem. Unfortunately, this is 9 of the 10 attacks from Bethlehem have been against Jerusalem, which is 2 miles away. The attacks against Tulkarm, which I could show you here, you don't see Tulkarm, but it's right here, is against Netanya, 7 miles away. Bethlehem, Jerusalem, like 2 miles.
But Jerusalem is behind the fence.
But that fence area has not been built, and what the Israeli citizens are protesting is, well, I mean, they know the government is working, but their view is that the fence would have already been done. This person would not have gotten through.
What's the U.S. government's position on the fence?
The U.S. government's position is fascinating in many ways. It's evolved over time. When there was a hope for a roadmap last June, and a Palestinian reformist leader, Abu Mazen Mahmoud Abbas, it was much more questioning about how will this help Abbas politically and the like. But with the roadmap collapsing and with Abu Mazen being outflanked by Yasser Arafat, the net effect is that they've come around to view that this fence is actually might be the only way to get us to a two-state solution. And Sharon has talked about getting out of Gaza. So the fence idea and Israel disengaging from Gaza are two ideas that could get Israelis out of Palestinian life and actually create the contours of the state and hold things over for the long term in the post-Arafat era and said, okay, let's resume the partnership, and now you guys have some little border modifications. It's really fascinating. I mean, if you're a Middle East history buff, you'll find some interesting precedents, is that whenever Israel had peace agreements, even interim agreements, they moved fences. In 1974 with the Syrians. In 1979, the Egypt Peace Treaty. In the year 1994, when the Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty. In the year 2000, when Israel withdrew from Lebanon. At every step, Israel moved fences. So the idea is that, oh, once the fence is there, it'll never be moved. There can never be border modifications. This is creating an irreversible fact. I think really flies in the face of history.
Forest Park, Illinois, you're first up with David Makovsky of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy.
Good morning, and thank you for C-SPAN. My point is very simple. The Palestinian people, as a people, are going to have to come to recognize that the militant approach that they've taken for 50 years against the existence of Israel is not going to exist. It's not going to work. Israel's going to be there and work from that point on. The fence at this point may turn out to be, just like the guest has said, may turn out to be the premise for the creation of a two-state state de facto by the fence. And until they recognize there's going to be two states, it's not going to stop. Simple as that.
I agree with the caller. I think, like I said, it wouldn't be the ideal solution. The ideal would be if there's a partnership. But I think right now the only option is not resuming a partnership, because it's just not in the cards, but it's to let these people keep killing each other, letting innocent people getting blown up, men, women, and children. And I think right now the fence is the best of the options available.
And as we continue over the next 15 minutes, we're going to show you pictures of the fence. Norristown, Pennsylvania, you're on the air.
Yes, it's a pleasure to speak to both of you this morning. But I wanted to say that the United States have been supporting Israel, which I don't have anything to do with that, but I spent 9 years in the Air Force. But what I see is this. I see as Israel does not, the United States does not let anything bad that's happening in Israel, that is Israel kills Palestinians, treat them worse than the apartheid government in Africa, well, the other part of Africa. The fact is they give them a little bit of water, and they also, the U.S. does something that is really terrible. Our satellites show give the Israelis digital formations of supposed Palestinians, because we got a guy in the White House who's bad news, and he's giving beside the $10 billion a year that we're giving Israel to build these fences and be an apartheid type government. It is making things real bad. What will straighten the whole thing out?
Okay.
That side was shown even in the papers. Then it would bring it to even playing field. And Israel cannot be used as a thing and call the Palestinian terrorists when they are terrorists.
Okay, thanks, caller. David Makovsky.
Look, there's a lot of trauma here and tragedy for many decades. We all want to bring this tragedy to an end and provide dignity for both peoples. And I think the idea of a two-state solution right now is the best way to achieve that. If the caller may remember, in the year 2000, Ehud Barak, who was then the Prime Minister of Israel, offered to, take down whatever it was, 80, 90 settlements, agree to whatever President Clinton put forward, both at Camp David and then what's known as the Clinton parameters on December 23rd, 2000, the last days of his presidency, to end this conflict. Unfortunately, and I think some of the Palestinians also wanted to, but Yasser Arafat is a revolutionary who can't live without a revolution and couldn't say yes for an answer. And unfortunately, this conflict did not end. We all wanted to do so. I would dispute with the caller, you don't see the equivalence here on both sides. You don't see the Israelis going into a pizza parlor or a discotheque or going into a bus and blowing people up. But it doesn't matter. Right now, there's a need to bring this tragedy to an end. And maybe the only thing we could do now is keep these people apart before we could bring them together again. And let's all pray that this tragedy ends soon for both sides, and so we could provide dignity for both.
Mason City, Iowa, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm happy to be able to comment today on this issue. The first thing I'd like to say is I'm not Jewish, but I have a great respect for Israel. I think they do what is best for Israelis, and in many cases I don't think the American government, no matter who's in office, does what's best for America. I totally support the wall. I think they're doing the right thing. They've had a very lot more patience with the murdering Palestinians than I ever would have had I been in charge of Israel. And the other comment I'd like to make is I wish we could hire them to come over here to give us some support and information regarding our borders. I think maybe we need a wall across Canada and a wall across Mexico to stop this insane attacks on our country by these illegal aliens.
Any U.S. taxpayer funds going to build this fence?
Right now, none. Israel does receive money for the United States, but no money is going for the fence right now.
Mount Olive, North Carolina, good morning.
Good morning. I believe that Israel has the right to build a fence. They have a right to protect their people. But what I don't agree with is, from what I understand, Israel is building a fence way into Palestinian land, which means they're taking over the land. That's not right. Now, I think, I don't know, but I feel that probably the majority of the Palestine people, they want peace, they want freedom. And there's just a small handful of people that are doing these bombings and all. I don't understand why the citizens of Palestine, they know the house next door is the ones building the bombs. They know who the troublemakers are. Why aren't they turning these people in? And I also think Israel is antagonizing Palestine a little bit.
Well, I think the key thing here is leadership. Leadership starts from the top. When Yasser Arafat publicly goes on Arabic television and exhorts his followers to have 1 million martyrs, and the result is you see 280 of these attacks. Doesn't mean that he's planning every single one, but providing a legitimacy for those attacks. The one, by the way, yesterday, killing 8 people, was done by the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, which is associated with Arafat's own Fatah movement. When the leadership sets that sort of tone, it seems to me that then it's not as well placed to complain, exactly where the fence is. I mean, imagine if you had 280, suicide bombing attempts, of which 60 got through here in Washington. People here might be a little upset, to put it mildly. Also, I'd like to make two other points related to the caller's point. One point is that you have to understand there's an internal Palestinian debate going on, which is how do you deal with Israel? Do you negotiate with it and compromise with it, or do you blow them up? If Israel would build that fence right on the 1967 line, on the green line, the net effect will be that Hamas will feel vindicated in the internal Palestinian arena, that if you blow people up, if you go to enough pizza parlors and discos and buses and just blow up as many people as you can, you'll get what you want. And these two people are going to live next to each other for a long time. Geography is a very stubborn thing, and it seems to me that if that policy is vindicated, the net effect is that pattern will reemerge. A third problem is more practical. Like I said before to you, Peter, was that you've got 94 to 99% of the Palestinians living east of the fence, 76% of the settlers living west of the fence, and there's 14.5% of the area. That's 170,000 people. Just to leave those people kind of left open at a time that suicide bombers are blowing people up is also politically untenable for an Israeli government. So it doesn't mean that Israel is going to keep all that area. Like I said, on the 4 occasions that Israel had agreements with its Arab neighbors, or even where it wasn't agreement, there was a withdrawal, each time it moved fences. And I'm sure here too, when a partnership is restored, there will be border modifications. But in the meantime, let's save innocent lives on both sides and stop this endless killing, because the alternative is what? Killing. I mean, or you have Israel go in taking more active forms against Hamas, going after them. This is actually a more passive form. So the people who say, well, Israel shouldn't have a fence, or Israel can't expect the Palestinians to defend the Israelis, or Israel shouldn't go after Hamas, it's hard to understand what they want the Israelis exactly to do. This is an interim measure, but I don't think it's a final one.
Next call, Columbus, Mississippi. You're on the air.
I have two questions. First, you said that directly no U.S. taxpayer funds are going to finance the construction of this. Is the U.S. Guaranteeing loans from international financial sources, and should those loans not be paid back, but the U.S. pay for it? And second is, since whoever produced this segment is calling this a border fence, has the state of Israel relinquished all claims to the lands on the other side of the fence?
Well, I think it's a good question. I mean, the first question, look, the U.S. gave Israel loan guarantees with the outstart of this intifada, the violence that began in September 2000. Shortly thereafter, it provided loan guarantees. These loan guarantees are not money, but it helps Israel borrow funds, and Israel has to repay them, as they repaid the loan guarantees it took out when it got a big wave of immigration in the early 90s. The second point about, I think in my foreign affairs piece that comes out now argues that the logic of the fence is that the remote settlements east of the fence are going to go. It'll stir a debate on that. I mean, and to make the viewers really realize it's not just my hope that it stirs the debate about the utility of these remote settlements. I can tell you there was an important interview that Ehud Olmert, who is the vice prime minister of Israel, gave to an Israeli paper, who said, I never said get out of settlements when I thought it meant, emboldening Arafat. It would just make Israel more vulnerable. But if there's a fence, then why does Israel need those settlements east of the fence? And that they're a minority of the settlers, but they live interspersed in that, what I call 85% of the West Bank east of the fence. So I think the logic of this fence and the logic of getting out of Gaza will prevail, whereby it might not be tomorrow morning, but people are going to say, do I want my 18-year-old son and daughter to actually patrol a settlement that's going to be Palestine? So I think this is, like I said, it's the only way to facilitate a two-state solution, and I think the days of these settlements east of the fence are gone. Or numbered, at least, I
If
should
you'd
say.
like to read David Makovsky's piece, Foreign Affairs Magazine comes out for March and April, The Right Fence for Israel. Next call for David Makovsky, Tampa, Florida.
Good morning. Peter, isn't your calling this segment the Israeli border fence when the fence is not even on the border but attempts to take Palestinian territory just typical of C-SPAN?
What would you have called it?
I don't know what you'd necessarily call it, but it certainly, you could say, the wall that they're building across the territory. It certainly is not a border fence between Israel and Palestine.
Thanks.
So,
We spent a lot of time on Friday talking about just that issue, what to call it. So this was
so why do you call it that?
This was the most neutral phrasing that we could come up with. Do you have a question for our guest?
Yes, actually, it was said that U.S. taxpayer funds are not being used to build this fence, but isn't money fungible in the sense that if you spend $1 here or there, it doesn't really matter as long as the money comes from someplace?
That caller seemed to not favor the idea of this fence, but let me just add a voice to that. Noam Chomsky writes this morning in the New York Times, a wall as a weapon. What this wall is really doing is taking Palestinian lands. It is also, as the Israeli sociologist Baruch Kimmerling has described Israel's policy, Israel's war of politicide against the Palestinians, helping turn Palestinian communities into dungeons, next to which the Bantustans of South Africa look like symbols of freedom, sovereignty, and self-determination.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Chomsky. I mean, I wish there was a map there, because if you would have a map of the, I mean, I could show you two maps in the Foreign Affairs piece, but I don't know if their cameras could pick it up. On page 60, the PLO, the PLO map claims that this is what Sharon wants to do. I call that an encirclement fence, which will create the effect that maybe Mr. Chomsky said. But in effect, if you look at this fence that Israel is building, it's almost very comparable to the final borders that Bill Clinton tried to achieve in the year 2000. This gets at 85% of the West Bank is to the east of the fence. Clinton got it at 95%. But here, this would be before the negotiations, and this would be after negotiations. So you could say, wow, 85%? It's a heck of a good start, and that will get you very much near the Clinton areas when, at the end of negotiations. So it seems to me that, this map, which is the one the PLO has gone around with, if you look at that, you say, yeah, this is a Bantustan-like situation. There's only one problem with it. Israel isn't building it. So it's misleading. That's not what Israel wants to do. There are some people on the Israeli right that do want to do this, but it's not right now what the military is building at all. This fence is remarkably comparable to the Bill Clinton final lines. So anyone who looks at the map would come to very different judgments than Mr. Chomsky. And like I said, I think the net effect is that anything east of this fence will go. I think it's the logic
Is
of
the
it.
fence inevitable?
Well, a third of it has already been built. If suddenly, it would be hope against experience that Mr. Arafat, would all of a sudden, go after the infrastructure of Hamas and jihad, which he is, basically nurtured by creating a kind of an intellectual climate whereby I want 1 million martyrs. Then I guess if somehow he does 180-degree about face, I guess anything is possible. But again, if there would be no terror, there'd be no fence.
St. Charles, Illinois, you're on the air.
Really, Noam Chomsky is your typical leftist, Jew hatred, New York Times type of guy. But anyway, it's pretty outrageous that the Europeans put the Jews on trial again. My question, David, is why doesn't Ari get a little serious about terrorism? I mean, I'm all for the fence, but his passivity in the last few months has just been outrageous. I mean, he hasn't responded. He's let Jews die. What's wrong with this man? I mean, I don't understand it. And my final point is, you talk about the Palestinians and chutzpah. You know, the meaning of chutzpah is when you kill your parents and then you cry that you're an orphan. And that's what the Palestinians do all the time.
Thank you, caller.
Okay.
Well, no, I mean, I was saying before to you, Peter, that, you know, it's a pretty awkward situation where the person who's exhorting Palestinians to 1 million martyrs then complains that it's not exactly on that line. If you want to call it audacity or chutzpah, I guess that would be an accurate reading of it. I agree with her. In terms of this idea of why isn't Sharon being more militarily more forceful, I think, you know, Israel has been engaged in this combat with the Palestinians now for 3.5 years. Now, it's an asymmetrical sort of warfare where one side is blowing up people in tax, you know, and pizzerias, discos, and buses. Israel is responding. But I think after all these years, Israel is saying, well, look, this thing is going to go on for a very long time. And offense and disengagement ultimately is the best hope. Israel doesn't want to rule 3.3 million Palestinians. It wants to get out of their lives. It's not simple because people say, yeah, if Israel gets out of Gaza and Israel pulls out east of the fence, the message will be terror pays and Hamas will feel vindicated here too. I'm not so sure because I'll tell you why. I think the rejectionists look at the demographic trends. And they see a situation that the Israeli Jews, while 80% of sovereign Israel, are dipping below 50% if you take Israel, West Bank, and Gaza together. So after year 2012, the Jews may be a minority. So I think the rejectionist view is let's just keep fighting and keep blowing people up for the next 8 or 9 years, and then we'll portray Israel as somehow a minority ruling a majority. So I think Israel is looking at the demographics and saying, look, Israel is a strong country. It just needs to get the demographic and occupation onus off its back. And then it's in a better position for a long haul until that partnership can be restored. They're going to have to come back to the table in the post-Arafat era. The whole world has given up on Arafat. But they're going to have to solve their differences over Jerusalem refugees and the like. And I think that the caller's course is what Sharon did for 3 years, and I think now he's believing that maybe another track is more useful.
David Makovsky is a graduate of Columbia with a master's from Harvard. He's a former journalist, wrote for the Jerusalem Post, Haaretz, and also for U.S. News and World Report, now with the Washington Institute. Thanks for being with us.
I'm glad to be with you.
Be right back with the head of the AFL-CIO, John Sweeney.
The National Governors Association has been holding their winter meeting here in Washington over the past few days. They'll wrap up tomorrow, but later this morning, President Bush will address the group. We'll bring you the President's comments this morning beginning at 10:20 Eastern on our companion network, C-SPAN 3. We'll get more from the governors later this afternoon. They'll hold a session on U.S. manufacturing and productivity. CNN's Lou Dobbs will make remarks, as well as the chair of the National Association of Manufacturers. See that live starting at 3 p.m. Eastern. It's also on C-SPAN 3. And this evening, President Bush will offer comments at a gathering of Republican governors. Also speaking will be Governor Mitt Romney of Massachusetts and Kenny Gwinn of Nevada. Live coverage here on C-SPAN starts at 7 p.m. Eastern.
I love the fact that I get to watch the House and Senate coverage. If I watch C-SPAN, I can see what's going on for myself, you know, not just a little clip. You can see what Congress is doing, what other branches of government are doing. If we're not informed, then how can we be good citizens? It's a great way to learn about what's going on.
For 25 years, cable's gift to America.